Dawn had not yet broken. The mist still clung to Greyhaven's walls when the sound of hooves reached them. The crown cavalry formed a line before the gate. On their breastplates was the silver eagle insignia, the symbol of Alpha King Cassian, the symbol of an order that many people behind these walls had once been forced to flee. The herald stepped forward and opened the scroll. By order of the Crown Council and under the authority of High Chancellor Vare, his voice carried as though it had been designed to strike stone, bone, and spirit. Greyhaven is an unlawful gathering not recognized by the Crown. The rogues residing within must surrender immediately. Individuals who have abandoned their lawful packs must be returned to their blood packs. Children identified as legal members of a pack must be handed over to that pack's representatives, and the person claiming authority over this place, a deliberate pause, must relinquish her position immediately. On the wall, Nico stood beside the warning bell. In his hand was a sheet of paper, a list, 17 names, the children the Crown called illegally detained pack property, the children Greyhaven called its own. A small hand tugged at his sleeve. It was Lyra, 7 years old, the daughter of an Omega who had died on the road here. "Nico, are they going to take me away?" Nico looked down at her name on the list, looked up at the cavalry, looked toward the person standing beside him. Seren Vale stood on the wall and looked at her people. Omegas who had been dismissed from their work, rogues without packs, healers stripped of their licenses, those who could not shift and had been discarded like refuse by the entire hierarchy, children no one had fought to keep, warriors with no master left to serve. All of them looked at her. The Crown Cavalry Commander urged his horse one step forward. "No Alpha will come to protect you. You have no pack. You have no law. Surrendering now is your only choice." Seren stepped to the edge of the wall. "No Alpha wanted us." Her voice carried clearly down to them. "That is why no Alpha owns us." A moment of silence. Then howls rose from Greyhaven, uneven, out of rhythm, not guided by any Alpha command. Each person howled in their own way. Omegas, rogues, people who had never been allowed to howl inside a true pack. Nico could not howl. He reached for the bell and rang it. The bronze note rolled out and joined the howls. Not the same, but moving in the same direction. 2 years earlier, Seren did not hate her work. Managing the royal grain stores was not a position anyone envied. There was no honor, no ceremony, no seat at the banquet table. There were only columns of numbers, transport routes, and the quiet responsibility that if she calculated wrong, someone would go hungry. But because no one paid attention to the grain stores, she saw the things no one wanted to see. That winter, the food allocated to 3 small packs along the western frontier was reduced by 1/3. There was no official order, no reason entered in the ledger. The missing food appeared again in delivery invoices for a noble lord in the center of the capital. Seren recorded it, questioned her superior, was told she lacked the authority. She kept recording. That afternoon was the treaty signing ceremony with Solmara. Seren was not invited into the Great Hall. Only those with pack papers and a certain rank had a place at ceremonies like that. She stood in the outer corridor, the inventory sheet still in her hand. Then the doors opened. Alpha King Cassian emerged ahead of the Solmaran delegation, and his gaze, accidental, unplanned, found her among the dozens standing in the corridor. She recognized it before her mind could explain it. Something beneath her ribs, in her throat, in the deepest instinct of a werewolf. Mate. Looking into his face, she saw that he recognized it too. 1 second, 2 seconds. The Solmaran delegation continued forward, Princess Malus beside Cassian with the calm composure of someone accustomed to diplomatic events. Cassian looked away, so did she. Seren stood in the corridor and told herself this was good news. If she was the Alpha King's mate, she could use that position to change what she had just recorded in the inventory. Food stolen from smaller packs. Omegas treated like unpaid labor. The system she had seen from within. She tried 3 times to meet him privately. All 3 times, Vare stopped her before she reached the room. The 4th time, Cassian came to her himself. In the grain store, at midnight, with no one there to witness it. He looked at her in a way that needed no words, but then he spoke. "I cannot acknowledge this." She asked why, though she already knew the answer. The betrothal to Solmara has been signed. The defense treaty, the border lands, 10 years of military support, all of it is tied to this marriage. He spoke without meeting her eyes. "If I acknowledge an unclaimed Omega as my mate, 3 Alpha alliances will withdraw. Malus will see it as an insult to Solmara. We could have a war. Is there another solution? Perhaps, but I do not have time to find one." She understood what that meant. Not, there is no time. But the cost is too high. 1 week later, at the public banquet celebrating the treaty, Vare stood beside Cassian and referred to her as an example of the staffing problems within the royal system. Packless Omegas without guardians, entering positions inappropriate to their rank. Cassian did not contradict him. Worse, when an Alpha in the Solmaran delegation asked directly whether there were any troubling rumors about the future Luna, Cassian shook his head and said, "An unclaimed Omega has none of the qualities required to be queen of any kingdom." Vare remembered those words. The next morning, Seren was informed that her position had been reassigned. Her small room in the palace's side wing had to be empty by afternoon. Her permit to travel within the capital was revoked. A squad of soldiers escorted her through the southern gate. There was no written order from Cassian, but neither did he ask where Vare was taking her. The convoy had 8 wagons and a document labeled Voluntary Resettlement. Seren looked at the people sitting in the wagon with her. An older woman whose hand was still bandaged after a failed shift. A man with his eyes closed and an uneven breath. Seren recognized the look of someone trying to use an alpha command to calm himself when there was no one left to receive the command. 2 children slept against each other. Someone in a faded healer's coat stared out the window, and a thin young man, his left hand gripping his right arm as if he were trying to keep something from falling out. Corin, 19 years old, and cast out by his pack because he could not fully shift. 12-year-old Nico sat in the corner of the wagon, awake, watching everyone. Seren knew this route. She had managed transport paths for 3 years. Which roads led to the markets, which roads led to the smaller pack villages, and which roads led to places people did not return from. The wagon was following the 3rd kind. She had no weapon, no pack, no authority. But she knew the royal locking system because she had signed for enough special shipments to know that transport wagons of this kind used the same code as the palace's secondary storehouse, and that code had not changed since last year. That night, when the convoy stopped to water the horses, Seren opened the lock. Not everyone wanted to leave. One man said he had a family and hoped the new place might be better. The woman with the bandaged hand said she was too tired to run. Seren forced no one. 9 people followed her into the forest. Greyhaven had not been their destination. It was only where they stopped because Corin knew the way, and because the abandoned mining fortress was solid enough to shelter them through 1 night of rain. They intended to stay for a week. Then another week. Then 2 families from a nearby village came to them. The husband cast out by his pack for refusing an alpha order, the wife carrying 3 children and a bag of seeds. Then came a healer, stripped of her certification for refusing to report her patient list to the local alpha. Then a group of young rogues whose omegas had no packs left to return to. Seren began doing what she knew how to do: take inventory, how much food remained, where the water was, who knew medicine, who knew construction, who could teach, who needed to learn. The old mine tunnels became grain stores. The underground spring was repaired. The eastern buildings were divided into living quarters and a treatment ward. No one gave orders. The work still got done. By the 6th month, Greyhaven had more than 80 people and a problem. No one held official power, but power still existed. It simply belonged to those who spoke the loudest, those who could shift, those who had been there longest. It was power without a name, and because it had no name, no one could examine it. The first open assembly took place in the fortress's central courtyard under torchlight. They argued for 3 nights. In the end, Greyhaven declared a list that was not a set of laws, but a set of commitments. The things they agreed to with one another. No one here would be ranked according to the circumstances of their birth. There would be no forced mate bond. Children were people, not the property of the community or of their former packs. Anyone had the right to leave at any time without another person's permission. The Alpha Command, the voice that forced werewolves to obey regardless of their will, was completely forbidden within Greyhaven's territory. Work would be assigned according to ability and choice, not status. Nico listened to the entire list and raised his hand. I want to join the watch. An older rogue man, Dav, once the gamma of a border pack, looked at him without cruelty, but with practicality. You cannot shift. In a real emergency, you would be a burden. In a real emergency, Nico replied, I know every tunnel here from memory. No one said anything else immediately. Seren did not step in to defend him. She told him to study the signal maps, the gate protocols, and the evacuation procedures before asking the question again. Nico nodded and went to learn. The following month, the surrounding traditional packs began to realize something was changing. Not because Greyhaven declared war or expanded its territory, but because their people began to leave. Healers, craftsmen, people who knew how to weave, make salt, and set broken bones. Omegas treated like unpaid labor. Warriors who no longer wanted to fight under alpha orders. Greyhaven recruited no one. People found their way there on their own, and that worried Vare more than any armed rebellion ever could. Princess Malus was not easily persuaded. She had lived in politics long enough to know that documents did not move by themselves, signatures did not change by themselves, and when a decree was written in a hand different from the signers, the question was not why, but who benefits. She placed the food embargo order on the table before Cassian. Your signature, but not your hand. Cassian looked at the document, looked at it closely like a man trying to find a reason to dismiss what he had just seen. Vare may have acted under emergency authority. The Emergency Stability Act does not grant him the power to blockade an entire community's food supply without a trial. Malus interrupted, not harshly, only precisely. I read that act. You gave me a copy last autumn, remember? Cassian remembered. He also remembered that the Solmaran delegation depended on the defense treaty, that the defense treaty depended on political stability within the Alpha Alliance, and that if he investigated Vir now, at least 2 Alphas would withdraw from the Alliance because Vir was their patron. When the treaty is fully secured, he said, I will investigate. Malus looked at him for a moment. Delay is still a decision, she said. When people are starving, she left the room. Cassian kept the forged order on his desk and did not investigate. During that delay, Vare sent someone to approach Corin for the first time. Iona placed the proposal on the table on Tuesday morning. She did not raise her voice. She did not use words like danger or vulnerability, the words people used when they wanted someone to become defensive. She simply presented the plan. Divide control of the tunnels among at least 3 people, not 1. Record every shipment entering and leaving, with 2 confirming signatures. A process for checking newcomers, not because of suspicion, but because knowing who was present was basic responsibility. A small defense group, not an army. Only people who knew what to do when something went wrong. An evacuation plan for children and the wounded if needed. I understand that you are afraid Greyhaven will become a fortress, Iona said. But refusing to plan does not make us safer. It means that if something happens, we will respond with panic. Seren listened to all of it, nodded, and did not implement it. Not because she did not trust Iona, but because she was afraid that if she began checking people, began making lists of who was allowed to know what, began questioning those who had been here the longest, she would be doing exactly what the old packs had done to them. She gave Corin full authority over the tunnels and the secondary storehouse, partly because he was good at it, partly because she wanted to prove that someone the entire system had called defective, unable to shift completely, unfit for pack life, could still be trusted completely. Vare contacted Corin 3 weeks later, not directly, through an intermediary at a small inn 2 hours' walk from Greyhaven. Ilia, Corin's 16-year-old sister, who was living with a foster family in the capital, was being held. There were no charges, only a request for information. Only Seren's location and the gatekeeper's duty schedule. Corin gave them those things. Then Vare asked for more. The location of the main grain store, the lock code for the secondary well, where the children slept, the location of the firebreak, the number of people capable of fighting. Corin sat across from the intermediary and looked at that list of questions. He knew, not suspected, knew. No one needed all of that information just to arrest one person. This was information for planning an attack, for crippling a supply system, for making sure that even if someone raised the alarm, there would be nowhere left to hide. He told himself that Vare merely wanted to prepare for every possibility, that Ilia would be released immediately afterward, that he had no other choice. He wrote down everything. The storm came on Friday night. Vare's soldiers entered through the western gate. Corin had given them the code. Bram, the elderly gatekeeper who had taught Corin how to read the locks and often traded shifts so he could visit Iona, was standing there when the gate opened from the inside. Bram tried to close it. He was too late. The main grain store was set on fire. Poison was poured into the secondary well. One section of tunnel collapsed, not because of a bomb, but because its support beams had been pulled free. A unit of soldiers went straight toward the children's sleeping quarters. Nico heard the noise and rang the bell before any adult could react. He had memorized the tunnels. He had made a list of every child's name and sleeping room. He used the small bell system he had built himself to wake them, and led 12 children through the secondary tunnel beyond the fortress wall before the soldiers arrived. Not everyone escaped, and Bram was no longer there when morning came. Corin found his body at the western gate. He lay in the exact place where Corin had given the access code to Vare's intermediary. Corin went to Seren before dawn and confessed everything. Seren listened and said nothing for a long time. Not because she had nothing to say, But because everything that came into her mind then was something she could never take back, once she spoke it aloud. Iona stood in the corner of the room, listening. "Elia is still being held," Seren finally said. "If we reveal this now, someone in the assembly will want to act, and Vare will kill her." "Possibly," Iona said. "Then we keep it secret until we find her, Seren." Iona's voice was calm, without accusation but clear. "You just decided which truth the people of Greyhaven are allowed to know and when. Alone. Without asking anyone. Silence. Mercy decided in darkness," Iona continued, "is still power without accountability. But if we reveal it now, Elia, I am not saying we must reveal everything immediately. I am saying you cannot decide that alone." Greyhaven gathered that night not the entire open assembly, but a randomly selected group of representatives. 11 people. Iona presented the situation. They debated for 2 hours. The decision: a watch group would secretly locate Elia that same night. The open assembly would be informed the following morning that there had been an internal betrayal, without a name, without tactical details. The complete information would be released after 3 days, or as soon as Elia was located, whichever came first. The secrecy period was approved by 3 elected representatives, not decided by Seren. Elia was found on the 2nd day, being held at a commercial transit station 4 hours' ride from Greyhaven. She was brought back before the hearing. The hearing took place in the fortress's central courtyard, in daylight, before the entire community. Corin stood before the assembly and told them everything. He had given them the map. He had known what Vare's questions meant and continued anyway. Bram had taught him how to read the locks. Bram had traded shifts so Corin could visit Iona. Bram had trusted him. "I killed him," Corin said, "not as a metaphor, not with my own hands. But I opened the way." Bram's family sat in the first row. His son, an older man who had followed his father to Greyhaven in its earliest days, looked at Corin and said nothing. Seren stood as well. She said she had ignored Iona's warning, that she had given Corin complete authority, not because it was the right organizational decision, but because she had wanted to prove something. That her trust had lacked oversight, and the absence of oversight had exacted a price. The assembly did not execute Corin, but he lost his position as tunnel manager. He was placed under supervision for 6 months. He lost his voting rights for that period. He had to assist with the entire effort to recover Elia and rebuild what had been destroyed. His full rights could only be restored through a separate vote later. Seren lost her unilateral emergency authority for 2 months. After the hearing, Seren found Iona. "You are still here," she said. "After everything that happened." Iona looked across the fortress courtyard, where people had already begun clearing the wreckage from the attack. "I warned you to protect this place, not to prove that I was wiser than you." "But you were right. Being right does not rebuild a wall," Iona said. "Only work does." By the 14th month, Greyhaven had a legal problem. 2 smaller border communities wanted to sign food trade agreements with Greyhaven. But under Crown law, an unrecognized community could not sign any binding treaty. And to be recognized, it had to have a representative acknowledged by the Crown as an alpha. The open assembly debated for 11 days. One side wanted to refuse every treaty and keep Greyhaven completely outside the Crown system. The other argued that standing entirely outside the system meant Greyhaven could not legally protect its people in any dispute. One person stood and said, "The problem is not the word alpha. The problem is who gets to call themselves alpha and what that title means." Greyhaven did not erase the title. They redefined it. The elected alpha would serve a limited term. There would be no Alpha command. The person holding the title would have no right to issue orders that compelled werewolves to obey. The elected Alpha could be removed at any time through a vote. They could not control both the military and the food supply. Those systems belonged to separate councils. There was no hereditary succession. They did not own the members of the pack. They only represented Greyhaven in diplomatic affairs. The Hearth Council managed resources and community welfare. The Watch Council managed security and defense. The Open Assembly was the policy-making body. Composed of every adult member, Seren was nominated while her emergency powers were still restricted because of the hearing. She was elected without an overwhelming majority. 2/3 voted yes, 1/3 wanted to wait longer. In her first week in office, she proposed expanding the learning hall to receive more children from neighboring communities. The Assembly voted the proposal down. There were not enough resources, not enough teachers, not enough time to stabilize after the attack. Seren sat down and nodded. All right, I hear you. Not because she agreed, but because this was how it had to work. He came alone. No entourage, no cavalry. Only Cassian and a letter bearing the royal seal, stating that he wished to negotiate, not command. Seren brought the letter before the Assembly. They voted to allow him inside. Not because they trusted him, but because she explained that knowing what the other side wanted was necessary information before making any decision. Cassian stood in the fortress courtyard and looked at Greyhaven like a man trying to understand something that contradicted everything he had been taught about how a community functioned. Register under the crown, he said. I will personally guarantee it. The blockade will be lifted, trade will reopen, and no one will be prosecuted for leaving a pack. In exchange for what? Seren asked. The Watch Council is dissolved. Greyhaven maintains no independent force, and Corin is surrendered for a crown investigation. I will put the offer before the Assembly. Seren, that is how decisions are made here. He looked at her, then nodded. The Assembly met for 1 hour. The result, rejected. Not because they did not want the blockade lifted, but because the terms required them to surrender the very mechanisms that had allowed them to survive. Seren gave Cassian the result. He was not surprised. But looking at his face, she saw something. Not quite respect, but close to it. They walked along the wall without either inviting the other, simply because they were moving in the same direction. How did you survive? He asked. We did not survive alone, she said. That is what you do not understand about how this works. Why did you not call yourself Alpha from the beginning? Because I believed all power was evil. A pause. Then I realized that refusing to name power does not make it disappear. It only makes it impossible to examine. They stopped at the eastern wall, where the collapsed tunnel had still not been fully repaired. What were you most afraid of? He asked. After Corin betrayed you? Seren looked at the tunnel for a while. Becoming you, she said. He did not turn to look at her. I wanted to hide the truth, she continued. To decide for everyone what was best. To call silence protection. To tell myself that good intentions were enough to justify it. She looked at him. You did all of those things, to me, to everyone in that convoy. I know. You also saw Vair's forged order, she said. Malus showed you, and you delayed. He did not deny it. I delayed because I was afraid of losing the alliance, and during that delay, Bram died. Seren said nothing more, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some things did not need to be spoken aloud to become true. You are changing, she said at last. I can see that, but there is no but. It is simply not enough to bring me back anywhere. Vare did not wait for Cassian to revoke his authority. He signed the extermination order on Wednesday night, using the Emergency Stability Act, using a copied seal, and using a file built over 5 months, forged evidence that Greyhaven was training rogues to fight the Crown, coerced statements from 3 detainees, and a list of children described as abducted from their blood packs. The army began moving before Cassian knew the order existed. Seren knew before the soldiers had left the capital, not because of spies, but because Malus sent word through merchant routes, along with a copy of the order bearing the wrong signature and a ledger of payments made to 3 of Vare's intermediaries over the previous 6 months. Greyhaven did not wait. The children and the wounded began evacuating through the secondary tunnel that same night. Food was removed from the main storehouse and divided among 12 hidden locations. The western tunnel, the one Vare had used in the earlier attack, was flooded. The watch councils cut the supply routes leading into the territory from 6 directions. Malus was not in the capital. She stood in the halls of 15 neutral alphas, placing copies of the forged order on their tables and asking, "Do you know this is not Cassian's signature?" Vare's payment ledger, who he paid, through which intermediary, and at what time, was sent to the 3 most powerful alphas in the Alliance. Greyhaven's messengers approached each Crown cavalry unit before they arrived and asked one simple question. "Do you know that you are being sent to attack civilians?" Not all of them stopped, but enough of them hesitated. Nico was not inside the fortress when the army arrived. He was in the secondary tunnel, leading the final group of 14 children toward the exit using the small bell system he had built the month before. A private chain of signals, independent of howls, requiring no ability to shift in order to understand. Corin provided information about where Elia and 9 other children were being held. Not because anyone asked him, but because he submitted it to the Watch Council as soon as Greyhaven received Malus's warning. Under supervision, without acting alone, Cassian reached the battlefield at sunrise. He did not come to Greyhaven. He came to his own army. "Revoke the order," he told the unit commander. "That order has no lawful authority. The High Chancellor, the Emergency Stability Act is suspended effective immediately. I am the Alpha King. My order takes effect now." Vare stood behind the cavalry line and spoke loudly enough for many to hear. "You are doing this for an Omega. The mate bond has made you weak." Cassian did not turn to look at him. "No," he said. "I was weak when I allowed men like you to turn my silence into law." Vare was arrested by Cassian's personal guard, not by Greyhaven's forces, not by the Crown soldiers standing on the field. Greyhaven did not win because of a speech. Greyhaven won because the food was no longer in the storehouse when the army arrived, because the tunnel could no longer be used, because the children were no longer where the soldiers expected to find them, because Malus's documents had reached 17 people before the battle began, because 3 alphas withdrew their troops when they saw the payment ledger, because soldiers refused to carry out an unlawful order when they were asked the right question at the right time, and because Seren's logistical plan, carried out by people without claws, without an alpha command, with only discipline and trust, built slowly over 18 months, kept the civilians alive until the sun came up. Vare's trial lasted 11 days. The list of charges was longer than any trial in 2 decades of Arkenfall. Operating illegal labor camps, forcing people who had left packs to return against their will, holding children as leverage, destroying civilian food stores and water supplies, forging crown orders, abusing the Emergency Stability Act, and launching an unauthorized armed assault. Cassian stood before the council and admitted that he had signed the Emergency Stability Act without creating an independent system of oversight, and that he had delayed the investigation after seeing evidence that Vare had exceeded his authority. 3 alphas from Vare's former alliance walked out of the trial and declared that they would oppose every reform. Cassian was not surprised, effective immediately. Greyhaven was recognized as an independent community. The Crown could not remove anyone from its territory by force. Alpha commands were forbidden within Greyhaven's borders. Every child taken during the attack was returned to the guardian the child chose. The remaining reforms, closing the labor camps, abolishing the forced return law, reviewing pack claims of ownership over children, compensating victims, required tribunals and council votes, and 3 of them met resistance within the first week. Real reform does not happen with a single signature, Cassian told Seren during a brief meeting to settle the recognition terms. I know you need to hear this. It will take years. I know, she replied. Greyhaven also took years. Change has no speed. Melix met Cassian privately on the 9th day of the trial. The betrothal, she said, was created by Vare, maintained by Vare, and served Vare's purpose more than it served either of us. She placed a document on the table. I am ending the marriage clause. The defense treaty between Arkenfall and Solmara remains in force. It was signed for the interests of 2 kingdoms, not for the marriage of 2 people. Cassian looked at the document. Are you certain? I never wanted to marry because of someone else's war, Melis said. I simply did not have a reason strong enough to refuse before now. She left the capital 10 days later as Solmara's diplomatic representative, not the Alpha King's betrothed. Corin testified at Vare's trial about how he had been approached, the questions he had been asked, and the way he had chosen not to look directly at what he understood. Helping rescue Elia did not erase that, and Corin did not ask for it to be erased. He returned to Greyhaven and worked with the crew rebuilding the Western Gate. He did not request the early restoration of his rights. He simply arrived, worked, and allowed time to prove what words could not. Cassian came to Greyhaven one final time, 3 weeks after the trial. There was no diplomatic agenda, no document that needed signing. He simply stood at the gate and asked someone to tell Seren that he wished to speak with her. She met him outside the wall. I want to repair what happened between us, he said. She looked at him for a moment. You did the right thing when it finally cost you something. That matters. A pause. But it does not return what you chose to throw away. I know. You can become a better man and still be the man who did that. I know that too. They stood in silence for a while, not uncomfortable silence. Only the silence of 2 people who had said everything that needed saying and were looking directly at the result. Will you stay here? He asked. Until the assembly elects someone else or I ruin enough things that they decide to elect someone else sooner. She looked over her shoulder at Greyhaven's gate. That is how it works. He nodded. He did not ask for more. She watched him walk toward the road leading away, then turned back inside. Nico was standing at the gate when a new family arrived that afternoon. A mother, 2 children, 1 small bag of belongings. They stood before the entrance with the look of people who had traveled far and were not sure this place would welcome them. The mother looked at Nico, the 14-year-old boy standing watch beside the bell, without claws, without any pack mark, and asked, What rank will my children be given here? Nico looked at the 2 children. One looked back at him with frightened eyes. The other looked through the gate into the courtyard, where someone was laughing as they played. No one decides that for them here, he said. The mother looked at him for a while, as though waiting for the rest. There was no rest. Nico opened the gate. From the wall, Seren watched the family step inside. The two children paused on the threshold for 1 second. Then the younger one ran straight into the courtyard, toward the laughter. No one called the child back. No one asked which pack the child belonged to. Greyhaven had begun as the place unwanted wolves came to survive. It endured because they chose to build something worth defending.